Ahoy hoy fellow bookworms, my name is Caroline and I like to read books, so let's talk about them. Today's video is going to be a wrap up of all the books that I read in October. Once again, I had a pretty great reading month. I read 12 books, 4 of them were comics or manga and 2 of them were middle grade fiction, and I enjoyed most of what I read. There were a few that I was kind of disappointed by, but overall, still a pretty good reading month, so let's just jump straight into this and talk about all the books I read. First up, I read books 2 and 3 of Y the Last Man by Brian K. Vaughan, and I actually ended up enjoying these a lot more than I thought I would. This is a complete series that follows Yorick and his pet monkey Ampersand, who are, as far as they know, the last 2 creatures on Earth with a Y chromosome. There's been a virus or something that has wiped out all men, which is crazy, and it's all about their adventures trying to find out why they've survived. They're trying to get to a medical facility, but along the way they're kind of encountering like radicals and like savages and all these different groups, and it's just really exciting. This series kind of steps it up with each book, and I'm really keen to continue. I've actually got book 4 with me as well that I'm probably going to read after filming this. So yeah, it's a good series and I definitely recommend it. Next up, I read Clockwork Angel by Cassandra Clare, and this is one of those books that I was kind of disappointed by. It just didn't quite live up to the hype for me. I really liked the world building and the different setting, and I loved Tessa as a main character. One of my main problems with this though was that I didn't like Will. I know from seeing fan art and other people's videos and stuff that Will Herondale is a big love interest in this series, and I just found him so frustrating in book 1 because he's like this tortured, grumpy soul who sabotages his own happiness because he doesn't think he deserves it, and I just find that a really frustrating thing for characters to do. But when I mentioned that in my Goodreads review, I had a few people tell me that he does get better as the series goes, so I'm still keen to continue, but it just wasn't as good as I expected. After that, I read This Savage Song by Victoria Schwab, which I enjoyed, but not quite as much as I was expecting to. It was really well written and quite enjoyable as a fast-paced story, but the characters kind of left me wanting more. So if you're interested in knowing more about my thoughts on this book, then I'm just going to leave the link to my review and you can check that out. Next up, I read The Walled City by Brian Gordon. This was pretty easily my least favorite book that I read this month. I ended up giving it 2 out of 5 stars because it just wasn't very entertaining for me. I went into this really expecting to love it because I loved Wolf by Wolf, which is by the same author, but this one was just filled with kind of forgettable characters, and it was action-packed and exciting, but it never felt like the characters were in any real danger, which is something I really don't like. So yeah, did not enjoy this book very much. Next up, I read book 2 of Orange, the Complete Collection, which is a manga by Ichigo Takano. If you've been watching my videos, you'll know that I absolutely loved book 1 in this series. Like, I raved about it on my channel. It made me cry, it made me laugh, it was so emotional and beautiful. So I went into this with pretty high expectations, and it definitely lived up to them. I really enjoyed this one as well. I didn't cry quite as much in it, but it was a really nice conclusion to the story. I will say that the ending was a little more sudden than I would have liked. It kind of came out of nowhere, but overall, still such an amazing, amazing manga that I love a lot, and I'm gonna keep watching the anime because that's really great as well if you're curious. The next book I read was Furthermore by Tahara Mafi, and I did say that I was going to do a full review of this, but when I finished it, I realized I hadn't loved it and I hadn't hated it. I was just kind of in the middle. I didn't feel like I had anything exciting to contribute to the discussion, so I figured I'd just talk about it in my wrap up. The writing in this was really amazing. I loved the voice of the narrator throughout the story, and the descriptions were super beautiful as well, but I didn't like the main character Alice for like half of this book. I can't quite put my finger on what it was about her that was so annoying, but I just didn't find her particularly likable until kind of near the end. And the other thing that annoyed me, I can't say because it's a spoiler, but basically something happens right at the end that just really frustrated me and probably took this from like a 3.5 star book to a 2.5 star book. Next up, I read Gemina by Amy Kaufman and Jay Kristoff, which I was like super excited for. This was one of my most anticipated releases of the year. It's the sequel to Illuminate, which I read in 2015, and it was one of my favorites ever, and this one was really good as well. Not quite as good as book 1, but still really entertaining and a really amazing way to tell a story. So if you're curious to hear more of my thoughts about this, I'm just gonna leave the link to my review and you can check that out. Next up, I read The Alloy of Law by Brandon Sanderson. I love the Mistborn trilogy. Like, I actually think it's one of the most like fucking perfect trilogies ever. It's amazing and I highly recommend that everyone reads it. But this is the first in a series that takes place 300 years after the events of those books, and I was kind of nervous going into it that I wouldn't like it, that it wouldn't live up to the Mistborn trilogy or things like that, and I ended up really loving it. I loved the 2 main characters, I loved the fighting style and the changes to like Mistborn powers and stuff. It was just really, really entertaining, and I'm definitely going to continue the series because I want to see where it goes. After that, I read A World Without Princes by Saman Shinani, which is the sequel to The School for Good and Evil, which I read and really loved. This one though, I was kind of underwhelmed by. It felt a lot more stereotypical in terms of like good versus evil and boys versus girls. It just felt like the characters were young all of a sudden, whereas in book one they felt quite mature and developed. This one they kind of took a step back, and I just didn't enjoy the story as much. It felt kind of repetitive, and I just wish the characters had communicated more. But I'm still going to continue the series. I think there's one more book in it, and I'm pretty interested to see what happened because this did have a really amazing ending. Next up, I read The Assassin's Blade by Sarah J Maas, which is a prequel to the Throne of Glass series, and I enjoyed it, but not quite as much as I was expecting to. It was really awesome seeing Selena be like a badass assassin again, and we got to meet Sam, and we encountered a few other characters that we've known from the rest of the Throne of Glass series, but I guess I just wasn't really grabbed by this in the same way that I was by the Throne of Glass series. I liked the characters, but apart from Selena and Sam, I wasn't really attached to any of them. My favorite story was The Assassin and the Pirate Lord, which was really, really awesome, but overall, it just wasn't as good as the rest of the books in the series. The final book that I read this month was book 11 of the Walking Dead comics by Robert Kirkman, and oh my god guys, this one was so good. I can't really talk about why it was so amazing without going into spoilers, and I don't want to do that, but it was just so amazing. It's easily one of my favorites of the entire series, and I'm like so crazily keen to continue it. Like, it's not even funny. I should mention as well that The Walking Dead is actually book number 100 that I've read this year, which means I've achieved my Goodreads reading goal, and it's crazy because I didn't think I'd be able to read 100 books in the year, and I've done it, so I'm really proud of myself. That's the end of my wrap up though guys. I upload videos Mondays, Wednesdays, and Saturdays, so be sure to like this one and subscribe to my channel, and stay tuned on those days for more bookish goodness. Toodaloo!